Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jack and from Tech. Hope you guys are all doing well. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm partaking in a challenge run by Erica Griffin, where you use a smartphone from several years ago and see how it stacks up to the latest smartphones. So I picked the iPhone 6s for this challenge, and I picked this for a couple of reasons. Apple is known for keeping software updates to their latest phones and keeping their older flagships really up to date and usable in later years, but a lot of things just came out about Apple and batteries and slowing down older smartphones, so I thought it'd kind of be interesting to use the iPhone 6s. So I did use this phone. I have a couple thoughts about it. To give you guys some context about what I was using before this phone, I was using the iPhone 10 and the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 as like co-daily drivers, so I was using iOS and Android, so that will kind of give you perspective. It's not like I'm relearning iOS. Although I did keep this phone on an older software version, just because I felt like that'd run better. I heard that the iPhone 6s had some trouble keeping up with the latest software. But yeah, let's see how it performed. While the specs have aged, it's still a solid option. The iPhone 6s has some pretty large bezels surrounding its 4.7-inch screen, which felt small at the time it was released, and feels even smaller now after I used a phone with a 5.8-inch screen. That's over an inch bigger. Consuming media is not so ideal on a screen of this size and resolution, but the colors still hold up, and so do the viewing angles, so in that regard, it's still pretty solid. This is a phone from the year that Apple added 3D Touch, so although it's the first generation of 3D Touch, it still works pretty well, and it's actually really convenient for the trackpad keyboard and a couple of app shortcuts. Nothing major though. The iPhone 6s also sports a home button and Touch ID, so as you guys have all heard, with the iPhone 10 there's no more Touch ID and there's no more home button, so I was actually kind of excited to go back to that, but after using it, I'm pretty sold on swipe gestures. It feels a lot more clean and minimal. I kind of felt like the home button felt like almost clunky. I don't know, wasn't a huge fan, but I did still like the convenience of Touch ID. I do actually kind of overall though prefer the way that Apple did the iPhone 10 with facial recognition and the swipes and everything like that. Kind of like that now. That surprised me a little bit. Other things to note about the phone though is since the screen is so small, it's actually really easy to use one-handed, and although the sheer form factor of it is pretty similar to the iPhone 10, the screen is just a little bit more manageable. It has a boxed off corners, so if you're not a fan of circular corners, you'll like that actually. A couple other things to note about the phone is that it actually still runs pretty smoothly in terms of software. This is running a bit of an older software version, but I actually think that it runs really well. I'm able to play some pretty intense games on the phone, and I'm also able to text and take pictures and videos and stuff with ease. Performance actually held up really well. I was very surprised. You will see maybe occasional drop frames every once in a while, but everything runs as you would expect it to, and those extra few seconds to save all this money is actually kind of amazing. You can pick this phone up on like Amazon or eBay for like $200, which is kind of an insane steal considering how expensive it was when it was released. Going over the exterior build, it's this aluminum frame and it looks pretty clean. It does not look as clean to me as the iPhone 10, as the antenna bands are still pretty present. It's got iPhone and an S on the bottom. This wasn't a major design change over the iPhone 6, it just had that little S added, so that's the way you'll be able to tell. On the left side, you have your volume rockers and mute/lock switch. It does feel a little small to me, and it's also kind of high up on the device, so I felt like I always kind of reached a little bit lower and then had to inch up a little bit. Nothing major with that though. One thing that I really did not like about this phone though is the battery life, and it could just be because I used this for a while and it's already kind of through its battery cycle. But at about 60%, this phone would just like run out. Like I would have to plug it back in, charge it back up. So it was kind of unexpected and like finicky when it would shut down and then when I would have to bring it back up. So that was kind of weird. Also, I would only be able to watch like maybe an hour of YouTube on here before the phone was like juiced out. So battery life is definitely the biggest flaw and definitely the biggest place where you can see how this phone has aged over time. Another place where you can kind of see how the phone's aged over time is the camera. It's okay, and at the time the iPhone 6s actually had one of the best cameras on the market, but when you compare it to like the Pixel 2 or the iPhone 10, it just is no comparison. Colors are still pretty good, but focus is not as good, and it's not as sharp as the iPhone 10 or other competitors from this year. Also, the video quality on it is just not as good. The stabilization isn't existent here, so you won't get any optical image stabilization. It's all digital, so it's very shaky when you compare it to like the Pixel 2, which also has digital, but it's just a little bit better, or the iPhone 10 or the Note 8. It just is not as good. So the biggest places where I felt like I couldn't use this phone was in the camera and also battery. I feel like if the battery was a little bit better, I would still be able to really recommend this phone, and I think on newer units it is. But the thing is, if you're buying a used iPhone 6s, it means that someone else has already used it and went through a lot of the battery cycle, which means you're probably going to be in the same predicament that I'm in. Unless you're buying a brand new, never used iPhone 6s, that's probably not an ideal situation. Unless you're then going to go to Apple and get the battery replaced and have a full charge cycle again. Because the phone actually held up like surprisingly well. I feel like I could deal with a little bit worse of a camera for the cheaper price. Like in this challenge, you're supposed to say like, could I have gone back to a phone from a couple years ago? And I feel like in some regards you could, but you will notice a little bit more of a lag and latency in software. The camera is obviously not nearly as good, and battery life, honestly, like I've said this so many times now, but it's kind of where this phone just can't be recommended if you're going to buy it used. And this kind of brings up the idea of planned obsolescence, which means that companies plan to have the phones kind of not be usable so then people upgrade. And I feel like Apple is one of those companies that does that, but less so than other companies. Like if you were to go to some Android companies, their phones slow down within a couple of months. Not all Android obviously, but certain Android companies. And I feel like with the iPhone, this phone is several years old and it still worked. I didn't really hate using it. Obviously the battery was a little bit of an annoyance and the camera not being as good was a little bit of an annoyance, but it was solid. Like I honestly am very surprised how well this phone held up over time. If you were able to fix the battery somehow, either get it replaced or get a brand new version, I would recommend this phone to you because you'll be able to get into iOS for a really cheap price. You'll get a pretty decent camera and you'll get a nice build. I actually really do like this build and this form factor. If you're looking for a compact smartphone, there's not really that many choices out on the market anymore. You could get the iPhone 8 at 4.7-inch version, and that would be fine, but that's a premium compact phone. There's not a ton of compact phones on the market that don't cost a lot of money, so I feel like this kind of fills that gap. I know that's not really the point of this challenge, but yeah, honestly, if you get the battery to work out well, this is a pretty solid phone. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what your thoughts are on flagships from a couple years ago. You should also check out other people's videos in this challenge. Some people use phones from a really long time ago, and that was also interesting. So I'm going to try to leave the playlist link down below, or like right here if I can. If it's not right here, that probably means that my other content's here, and you should check that out. You should also subscribe right here. Thank you guys all so much for watching this video, and I hope to catch you guys on the next one.